enthusiastic introduction.
Was that enthusiastic for you? Yes, we ran out of coffee, and both he and I are reading the day without a lot of caffeine. Thank you so much for being here.
I want to make clear that I think maybe due to your leadership, this is the most effective technology council in all of America. We actually studied this question. So I want to thank you. You're clapping for yourself.
That's a Pittsburgh thing. We all clap for ourselves.
You do?
Yes, we do.
Another local custom I'm going to learn by
It's a
being
local
here.
custom.
But you all should be very proud of this because you've managed to take a pretty good environment and make it much, much better because of the stuff that you all do. And I also wanted to take a minute to comment about having such a strong mayor. The mayors are, Mayor Luke, mayors in our society are where the political skills and leadership are really honed. Mm-hmm. And the kind of dynamism that you see politically here goes along with the dynamism that you see in the Technology Council. And that's part of the secret that I think we should talk about. So thank you as well.
Thank you, Luke. Okay, I have a few questions, and I thought we'd have a chance to talk about this. Now, I believe that you'll be surprised by the people that you meet here and the people that work here. And
well, I've actually been here a fair amount, and I really like the place, so I may not be as surprised as you think.
Okay, well, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. So what does it take for someone like you to move here to Pittsburgh?
Well, the company is expanding dramatically. Unfortunately, my basic job is to make sure I keep everybody else in check, and most of them are still in California. But we video conference into Pittsburgh a lot. Okay. But we are, what happened was, as a bit of history, much of computer science was essentially invented here in the 60s, early 70s by people who by people who taught the people who taught me. And so when I was a very young programmer, people who went to Carnegie Mellon and lived in Pittsburgh, that was sort of godlike. And I didn't realize it at the time, but now I understand that it's part of a long history of Pittsburgh of inventing new industries, dating back to Mr. Mellon, Westinghouse, the air brake, all of the things that everybody knows. You all know much better than I. So when it came to getting ourselves established, there was no question we should establish ourselves in Pittsburgh as well, just because of that continuity.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll get back to that question in terms of when you're moving here. That's for people here who know me, they know that I will continue to ask everyone that question. So seriously, though, in the past couple of months, I learned a lot about Google that I really didn't know. And honestly, I was fascinated with the array of products that you've deployed in the past couple of years. You know, you're obviously in search, but your products range from digitalization of books, satellite maps, photo management, and now you're even talking about launching your own operating system.
We've announced we're launching our own operating system. We better do it.
You have also had the luxury of, as a result of the growth and penetration of your company, to profess the democratization of information. So what I was hoping was that you could spend a few minutes to provide our audience here with some brief context as to where Google came from and how you've gotten where you are and where you might be, let's say, in the next, 2 years, because 5 years would be a long stretch in your world. And, lastly is, who would have thought that Google would have become an accepted verb? And, what verb currently describes where you're at?
Running.
Running, yeah.
I don't know if is that a verb or not, but it's a state. Google was founded to organize all the world's information by our two then young founders, and they brought a generation of people with them who saw information and technology in a very different way than what had existed up until then. The key development at Google was a new algorithm for ranking that would allow you to sort of organize things in a new way. It was called PageRank. It's long since been dissected, copied, and so forth, and the technology's moved on. But without that key innovation, which the two founders invented when they were in graduate school, the rest would be history. They found some people who were willing to take some risks on them. They built the company, they built the hardware themselves, and they built the search engine. They didn't really know how to make money at it. And in fact, they visited all of the other people and said, we would like to sell our search engine to you. And everyone said no, because it was too disorganized, it was too different, it was too strange. And so they were forced to build some form of revenue. And so they decided to go into advertising, and it was sort of a happenstance that advertising occurred. Along the way, the culture of the company was very much that of a graduate school, which means not much difference between home and work, an awful lot of pets, a lot of strange personal behaviors. Those of you who've been to graduate school know what I'm talking about. And the company's culture has evolved to that day. And so what happened was the Google today is really the grown-up version of what I just said, right? Obviously a big advertising company, obviously many services along search around organizing information, and a cultural phenomena that represents creative ideas of a new generation. And I'd like to think of Google in all of those forms. Today, we also would, our critics would also say we're probably also a disruptive force in many industries. And I don't think that anybody anticipated that that would occur when the company was early founded.
So can you describe to us the role that your Pittsburgh operation will play in some of your product strategies? And can you help us understand the key issues that factored into the decision to establish a permanent residence here? And any surprises along the way?
Well, in Carnegie Mellon's case, Carnegie Mellon, again, this is a characteristic, I think, of Pittsburgh that you all accept. You may take it for granted, but it's rather unique. You have a very good working relationship between the university and the local businesses at the technical level, to the point where Jerry Cohen, as part of his sort of, he's been there for what, 10 plus years now. When he started off, he said, let's go one step further. Let's put the little incubator companies on the campus. Let's build a building right next to the campus, right next to the train line and so forth, and raise some money and figured out a way to do this, which is reasonably difficult to have pulled off at the time. Other universities have now copied this model. And so Jerry and the team that worked for him basically organized themselves to take people directly, because remember, these are young people. They already live there. They like it. And they literally can just, instead of turning left on the sidewalk, they turn right, and they can continue what they're working on. And I think that innovation model, which has now, as I said, become the model that everybody else is using, is probably why it has been so successful. My understanding is Pitt has a similar model now. So I think from you all's perspective, once that occurred, it was easy for us to begin. We were able to hire talented leadership out of the university, and again, these are people who literally would turn, same parking spot, different direction building. And it's a very good working relationship to the point where much of our staff, for example, have affiliations with the university. So they go back and forth. And that affiliation is, and then of course, finally, a lot depends on our leader. As you mentioned, Andrew has been very successful for us. And I didn't really answer your real question is what do they do? The answer is programming. And we're a programming company, and roughly half of Google's people are in technical programming operations of data centers, which is a very large number, by the way, compared to most companies. And we see ourselves as the innovators of computer science at scale. So we see ourselves as taking the ideas that people talk about in research and applying them to infinitely large amounts of data. We can come up with insights that no one else can because of that.
Okay, great, thank you. So you've been consistently ranked as one of the top companies, if not the top company to work for, and not just because of the rapid growth and not just because of the enormously successful business, but it's the culture. And you described it a moment ago when you talked about, it's really graduate school, sort of the organic design of the culture. But you're a $22 billion startup company, essentially. And how do you preserve that culture in the midst of rapid growth and decentralized, teams?
Well, it's sort of a mess, and by design. And I should also say that the culture adapts to scale. So Google's culture today is not identical to the culture that we had as a small company. It's its natural next step from that, but it comes from a set of principles. Simple for you all. You all work in corporations, most of you. For those of you who are not the CEO, you can probably very accurately describe the culture of your company. And my guess is that if you're not the CEO, the description that the CEO would give is quite different from the culture that you would give. My experience with corporate cultures is that there is a distinct corporate culture in every company. Sort of, how does it work? How do I get things done? How do I feel? How does it? And that sort of dominates everything. And if you look at industrial structures that fail, to use a bad example, the Detroit automobile companies, they had a very, very distinct culture, which everyone understood, and everyone understood had to change, and they couldn't change it. So we work hard on what that culture is. So the first comment is, there is a culture whether you like it or not, and if you're the CEO, you should ask somebody what the culture really is as opposed to what you say it is. And then the second thing is, in innovation industries, which is what the Pittsburgh Technology Council is all about, innovators don't like being told what to do. I know this is a shock, right? I mean, everyone who works for me, they just love me telling them, well, you do this, and you do that, and you do this, right? I'm obviously being facetious. These people actually went to graduate school to learn something, and now you're going to tell them to go sweep the floors. It just doesn't make sense. They want a culture where they can pursue what they really care about. And I'll give you an example. So when Larry Sergey and I were trying to figure out what to do, at one point we went to visit Warren Buffett, right, who's very smart. And we asked him what was his culture, and his answer was, his theory about companies is you buy a company where the executive is going to work there whether you pay them or not because they love the business so much. And that's how he manages, 37 companies, largely without any staff, because he had like 8 staff on his floor that we visited him. And I thought, that's an industrial model that had never occurred to me. Have the people just do what they want, rather than me telling them what to do. So if you can get through this notion of command and control, and instead trying to figure out, what do people want to do? What are they passionate about? The culture will evolve to something very, very interesting. And that's how Google happened.
So you think that applies to other industries as well?
Why would it not apply to other industries? I mean, certainly the private sector, you're going to be better off with more empowered decision making. And what happens is you get into this culture where it's like you don't like the people who work for you. You say, those people and this and that, and you get this sort of tonality. Well, if you don't like that, go get a different job. You don't like the people who work for you, maybe you should quit. I mean, there's a reason why these people work here, and you should have the right people, and you should empower them. And often empowering means actually listening, as opposed to telling them what to do.
Okay, well, good, thanks. So what about your ability to look externally? So as you're this $22 billion company, obviously, with the kind of parameters that you've talked about, which was essentially seamless, no walls, a lot of self-direction. Do you look externally for innovation, for different ways to fuel your future growth?
We look externally for innovation, and we're now at a scale where it's efficient for us to buy small companies of innovation. It's fundamentally faster if we can find a 5-person startup here in Pittsburgh and buy them.
I heard you just did that.
I know. Funny thing.
That's
we did
a funny
it
thing.
Yesterday.
That's a funny thing.
Because most of these little companies get started and people don't really have a plan for huge success, but they're having a really good time. And they tend to be extremely efficient with respect to people and their culture and so forth. It's usually not efficient to buy a large company. Because with a large company, you catch all of their problems. You catch their culture, their issue, their history, and so forth. There is a couple notable exceptions. We bought a large company called DoubleClick, which turned out to be very strategic for us, but that's pretty rare.
So do you want to say anything about this local company in Pittsburgh?
We bought a company called Recaptcha, which does a very clever way of doing they invented a new way to figure out whether you're a human being or not. The problem on the internet is no one knows if you're a dog. We actually need to know if you're a human or not for lots of things. And there's a lot of attacks on Google that can occur by people getting 5,000 computers simulating human behavior. And it's another one of these sort of very clever innovations coming out of Pittsburgh.
Very proud of that. So if there are entrepreneurs in the audience today who would like to share their ideas, what avenue, what forum does Google offer? Or, what would be your advice? Because we have a lot of interesting things that people are working on and solving really hard problems here. How would we navigate? How would we demonstrate?
Well, the question is, who's the audience? In general, transparency is a better answer for things. And so I always encourage people, write down everything you're doing and put it on a website. And you never know who's going to show up. Mm-hmm. There are people who actually care about the thing you care about. I know it's sort of abstruse, but there's another person, you just don't know them yet. Mm-hmm. And what's great about the internet is you can find these people, like people can find each other. From our perspective, we have product managers who actually look in areas of technology, and we tend to find these things. So the communities of specialized interests are pretty small. And so we tend to find people through the university or through referrals and so forth. But in general, people are writing down what they're doing, and that seems to get their attention. The venture industry calls us every day because they're looking for an exit. Mm-hmm. And what happened with venture was that before Sarbanes-Oxley, it was relatively easy to go public. And Sarbanes-Oxley was put in place after the dot-com bubble and bust in 2002, 2003. And now it's relatively hard for these small companies to go public. So for most venture people, they have to get somebody to buy them. And Google is on the list along with a couple of other companies.
Okay, so in what seems like the blink of an eye, and probably for you since 2001 you've been there, Google has become an example of a real successful international business. But along the way, you've caught the attention of a few world leaders agitating some fears of some of these nations. So help us understand those challenges that you faced with some of these quote-unquote closed societies, and even some of the challenges you faced in open societies, which include the European Union, where at least one leader felt that Google was serving to advance an Americanized culture in their country and went as far as to perhaps fund the creation of a competitor. So talk about the challenges, give us a little bit of the backdrop.
Not everybody is in favor of all the world's information organized and available to everybody. An example would be that if you were a dictator and for a day and you had a small country, what you would do is you would immediately circle the country, take your tanks, put them along the border, shut down the television stations, keep everybody in the dark. And so if you take this obviously crazy example, the internet is the best antidote to dictatorship, lack of transparency, sort of all of that's ever been invented. And it's very, very difficult to put a moat around your country with respect to the internet because information gets in. And even the most centralized regimes, the worst kind of non-elected regimes, have some level of legitimate support. And the internet is a real threat to them because the truth comes out. And I'm sure that we will be shocked with countries that are repressive when we find out all the horrific things that have been going on that we don't today know about because they're not being reported. And one of the things that I'm proudest about is that technology is really empowering individuals to see, record, and talk about what's happening to them. The horrific treatment of people around the world, and I won't go into the details, but you know what I'm talking about. And now with a digital camera, with a mobile phone, every mobile phone is really a video camera and a digital camera and a supercomputer all at once. We actually can find out what's happening out and in my view, make the world a better place. So in Google's case, governments have a legitimate interest in dealing with information, and we are a threat to those that don't want a lot of transparency to the individuals. And what happens with repressive regimes is they're smart enough not to say we hate open things. They'll say, for example, we hate pornography, and then they'll define pornography to be what we think of as political speech. And then that creates the cycle. And we fight that every day.
Okay, so now rewind to September 23rd, 2008. Our nation's economy seemed to be hinging on the edge of a bottomless pit, and the world seemed ready to follow us in. How did Google react then, and how is the current economy affecting Google's strategy?
Well, it's worth remembering what happened a year ago, because people have such short memories, you forget what happened so quickly. This week, literally a year ago, on the Wednesday morning, the financial trading system around essentially the way money market funds work actually failed for a small number of hours. Literally, the dollar that you put in was not the dollar that you came out. And it had to do with the fact that the banks that were guaranteeing day-to-day deposits had managed to invest in securities that were securitized by AIG and Lehman. Mm-hmm. And I sit there, and I remember at the time thinking, where were the regulators? Of course, I'm with the regulators because I was in the meeting. And like, didn't you guys know this? I mean, the computers all talked to the computers. So the computers all knew what the other computers were doing. And yet, our government and the other governments did not know this. And so the first question I would ask is, what was the failure in lack of information that got us to that point? And until you can answer that question, you can't figure out how to prevent it from occurring in the future, or decide if you can't prevent it in the future. The simple answer is the transparency one, that had the generalized risk, had all of the sort of aggregate information been publicly available, people would have discovered all of this was going on. So given that that was the problem, we had this huge influx of capital, of cash, which is about $7 trillion of guarantees of one kind or another in the US, about a half of our GDP. Similar numbers or even higher numbers in Europe. And it monetized everything. So it's a quick recovery from a death spiral that was induced by this credit collapse. So from Google's perspective, we knew, because we could see the activity, we actually saw a shift in activity in about June of last year as the currency markets shifted. And I became worried about it over the summer, but I didn't understand it. But obviously by September we understood it. We slowed our hiring, although we didn't stop. We put some significant expense controls in place. And it all seems largely behind us now. It looks to us that the worst is behind us. We can't predict the future. But we've seen reasonably good advertiser behavior, and not just in the US, but also around the world. I had originally assumed that you'd have the US recovery first, and Europe would be 6 to 12 months later, which is the historic pattern. But one of the new discoveries is that the economies are so interlinked that they fall together, and they climb back up together, which is a sort of a new fact for economists globally. So I think we don't know what the slope is, of course. We can't make future projections, but it's clear that the worst is behind us.
So with some of those lessons in mind and some of the observations that you've made, what message might you have for today's world leaders who are gathering here in helping them encourage innovation in their own respective, economies, as well as in the US?
Well, I'm one of these people who believes that there's smart people everywhere, including in countries other than our own. By the way, I'd like us to bring them to our country, educate them, and keep them here. But that's my own American view. And by the way, also give them visas so they can stay. Little things like that. But this is it's one of the greatest, it's one of the most brilliant strategies of our government.
Right.
Take really smart people, pay for their education in the US, kick them out, go to a different country, create jobs, and hire people away from America. Now that's a really pro-growth strategy, right? But I do have an opinion about this.
Yes. You don't need to stop.
I think we're in agreement on this one. Every Western country is facing the following rough problem. The rise of the third world, in particular India and China, and eventually the Pan-Asian countries, who have a demographic benefit. They have a very large number of young people. And by the way, this will also be true of the Arab world at some point in our lifetime. If you just look at the demography, you have a very large number of young people who can basically enter the workforce at low wages because of wage levels in general, and they basically can compete both in terms of traditional farming and now high-volume manufacturing. So it forces countries like the United States and like Europe to build economic value through some other mechanism. I can't come up with a better mechanism than what you all do. In fact, I don't know of an alternative. Because the way you create wealth in a society is you build something. I'll give you an example. America is the inventor of something called basically nanotechnology. And it's a form of advanced manufacturing where you make things atom by atom. And I know this sounds crazy, but it's as significant a potential manufacturing set of industries as the stuff 100 years ago that was invented here in Pittsburgh. And America has the scientists, the patents, the ideas, the culture, and so forth and so on. The president, as part of his innovation agenda, has identified this as one of the areas. Now, could that be a $1 trillion industry? You betcha. It could also not be. There's a bunch of these high-tech, manufacturing-centric innovation industries that will become the source of real wealth creation. I'll give you a negative example. So Britain, and I'm an economic advisor to one of the parties there, had the following problem. They decided to focus on being the centerpiece for financials. And so for a long time, all of the interesting financial innovation occurred in the city, in London. Well, the problem is when it collapsed, what's the future? Because making money doesn't really make things. And it gave the illusion of really prosperity in the culture. So I think here we have an opportunity with the leadership of people in this room to build a genuinely sustainable, differentiated economy, not just for Pittsburgh, but for America. And there are example after example. The classic one, the other classic one is in green jobs. It was funny that you talked about the article, the Economist article, which I happened to read yesterday, so I cut it out. The president said on September 8th, Pittsburgh has, quote, transformed itself from the city of steel to a center for high-tech innovation, including green technology, education and training, and research and development. That's you. And by the way, that's the president's agenda for America.
Great. That's a great quote. Okay, enough of questions from me. And what I'd like to do is open it up to the audience, but just a few caveats. There are Tech Council staff that are standing with microphones, so you can see we have Emily on one end, Raj over there, and Matt at the other end there. They're waving. So all I ask is that if you have a question, just use the microphone. Let us just do it in sequence, and let's try to keep it short so that we can make time for everyone to get their questions answered. So we're going to start. Who's got the first question? You have one, Emily? Okay.
Hi, I was wondering, what is your message to young people around the world?
Work harder. Think about the benefits of being a young person today. Everything that you care about is on your mobile phone. Right? Think about it. So let's work on that for a while. It seems to me that when I think about what a young person would do, what I would be doing if I were sitting at your table, I would try to figure out how to make that vision of how my world works so incredibly connected. There's a lot of, in our society, there's this sort of this continuous negativism about things, but I think that this generation of young people, as a data point, is smarter, works harder, more together, will have a better outcome and a better future than we ever did. And I say that because we hire them. So I talk to them. And so when you turn off, my advice is to everybody else, turn off the television and talk to a young person. And even better, work for them. Because you're probably going to end up anyway.
That's a great answer. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming. I know Stanford has Sand Hill Road and Kleiner Perkins, which ironically Henry Hillman had helped founded here. How does Pittsburgh get that type of investment environment? And I know investors like to keep their investments close. How do they attract those risk takers to actually invest in some of our startups here and create that climate of risk taking here?
There has been some in the technology sector here that has been somewhat successful. I think the criticism, it's always difficult to compare yourself against the sort of #1 player and how do you do better. It's very difficult to displace Sand Hill Road and Silicon Valley simply because of its scale. And people have written about Silicon Valley's death for many, many years, but it always reinvents itself. It's reinvented itself into the green technology, green areas. And there's clearly a center of mass. So I guess my own view is you need a certain level of activity to get enough people and enough money. You are seeing some of it here. You're also seeing some of it in Austin, Texas, and in a few other places. But it's ultimately, from my perspective, a function of loving the universities and spending more time with them. Because the money will come when the money is made.
Thank you. Okay, Matt, yes. Hey.
Eric and Audrey, thank you so much for this discussion this morning. It's really informative. Eric, the question's for you. I'm the CEO of a small software startup here in town. And last week, we were on site in Brazil with the Google Earth outreach team, working with local folks on collecting data about their forests and whatnot. And I was very surprised to learn how deeply embedded social and environmental change is in the culture at Google. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of that work.
Well, one of the questions that I would ask you is what do you think, what causes your employees to come to work? And if your answer is because we pay them, then that's not the right way to organize your company. People come to work ideally because they human values, the things that they really care about, because life is short. And so Google has somehow managed to attract a set of people who are socially conscious. We made a set of commitments to them, including spending 1% of our profits, 1% of our equity on social goods. We've tried to set an example in climate change and social policy. It's interesting that you mentioned Google Earth. I did not realize when we bought Keyhole, which became Google Earth, how fundamentally different it was to have a new dimension of looking at things. I just missed it. And what's happening now is that philanthropic groups of many, many different kinds are using the Google Earth platform to sort of show what's happening to the world around us. Not just the actual Earth, there's obviously lots of things people worry about, but also the societal changes, population issues, disease issues, and so forth and so on. So I think culturally, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about values. There is a culture in your company, whether you like it or not. You should figure out what it is and then steer it to the things that you think are most, ultimately, I think, that will cause you to attract the smartest people. I've never met anybody who has joined a job saying, oh, I'm going to hate this, and I don't like to work, and this is a disaster, and I don't know why I'm here. They don't start off that way. So your job is to keep that optimism, keep the optimism, if you will, of the youth. The sense that they can do anything is very, very important.
Okay, thank you. We have a question on this side.
With kind of the invent of the new Web 3.0, what specific technologies do you see driving the web forward in the next 2 to 5 years?
Pardon a little bit of some abbreviations for the rest of the audience. There's a new standard in web browsing called HTML5. HTML is the standard that browsers use to project things. And probably the most important thing is getting this new standard adopted. Most of the browsers are adopting it. And with that, it will be possible, for example, to have very sophisticated gaming on the web, very sophisticated ways of keeping information while you're on an airplane and you're disconnected and then you get reconnected, those sorts of things. That's probably the most important single thing that can occur on the web. Without something like HTML5, the web will remain an adjunct, and then the traditional personal computer structures will probably stay there for a much longer time. People who are working on the web really want the web to become so pervasive that it's always around you, it's always working, and everything you can do is on it. That obviously favors Google, but it also favors a lot of other companies. It also lowers the barrier to entry for new companies. So if you think about, we're talking about creating new companies. Today, you can invent something brand new here, and you can have millions of users anywhere in the world very, very quickly. And that's because of the standardization of the web.
Good, thank you. Bosch, yes.
Thank you very much for being here this morning. I'd like to reiterate the point you made about our young people. I teach at American University, and I see these kids. I see their enthusiasm. I see their optimism. I see their drive. And I'm really, really hopeful that we're going to have a really bright future. For me personally, I'm a wind energy entrepreneur, and I want to cool your servers. So I want you to tell me how we can make that connection from my wind turbines to cooling your servers.
Andrew's sitting right here.
Andrew.
Raise your hand. We actually, we've looked pretty carefully at wind turbines, and we use so much power that the complexity of us getting the wind turbines right next to the data centers, the funny story is that we like to buy land right underneath the transmission tower, and it has the property that it's also the cheapest land. So we've bought these, square miles and square miles of things right underneath power lines, because we then build a substation to run our data centers. We have invested heavily in various forms of solar and wind technology. We're also investing now in various forms of geothermal, which we think is interesting. And we do that partly because we think it's good business, and also because we think it's better for the world.
Good, okay. Let's go on this side, yes.
Yeah, technology is obviously essential for America in the 21st century, but intellectual property rights seem to be under fire globally, particularly in parts of the developing world like China, India, Brazil. As a technology company, what sorts of policies should the United States be advocating in order to protect intellectual property rights for the developed world as well as the developing world?
The problem that you cite has been true for many, many years. When I was doing PC software, it was estimated that something like 95% of the use of our product in China had been stolen, and that we would make an extra $1 billion of revenue if they would just pay. And we could never quite figure out a way to convince anybody to pay. And it seems like in those countries, this is a cultural value as well as a legal issue. In other words, it's hard enough to police it just with technology, but fundamentally people just don't understand that they're stealing. It's not the way the culture was built. I think the single best way to solve that problem would be to have those countries develop their own industries that depended upon this and have the change come from within, rather than relying on American trade negotiators going in and yelling at them. Because I think fundamentally that's not working very well. Obviously I support us doing that, but I think ultimately societal change comes from within. It comes from people saying, hey, maybe we need to actually have our own industry where we actually have performers who are paid for and so forth and so on. We can't succeed without an effective copyright because we, Google, don't create this stuff. And so somebody has to create it, and for them to create it, they have to get paid for it. You didn't ask this question, but it's worth noting that the problem...
Ooh. Just went out.
I think it's a battery problem.
Got it.
There's a much bigger problem looming, and it has to do with the quality of digital copies. The fact of the matter is that digital copies are so good now, it's so trivial to make copies of everything, that a lot of the sort of scarcity, things like making it difficult to do film distribution, because you had big reels and so forth, is really going away. And so the industry is going to have to deal with this. It may be, the fact that you can get perfect copies really has made it difficult to build a lot of these media businesses, and I feel very sorry for them in that sense.
Okay, I'm trying to go around here. Hi.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for joining with us today. And my question was, What drove you to leave Apple on their board and rejoin with Google on their move with the G1 phone?
As a bit of background, I was on the Apple board for 3 years. And when we started, Apple and Google did not have so much product overlap, but there were so much, we began to do things which have at least the appearance of competition. And I had to sort of, the way you solve this problem, I now know lots about board governance laws. So if you're on 2 boards, you're not allowed to favor one over the other. And if you do so, it's a crime. And it's like serious. And so it's called the 2 hats problem. And what you have to do is you have to treat both boards equally. And if you can remove yourself from one, which is called recusal, you can do that. Well, the problem with the Apple board was I was recusing myself from a good chunk of it. At which point, we talked about it as a board, and we said, well, okay, this is just not working. So that's why I got off.
Good question. Okay, next, Raj. Yes, Raul.
As is known, Google makes most of its revenue from advertising.
It's only 98%. Only
98%. As was noted by Audrey, Google has invested a lot in new products and services for consumers and enterprises. My question is, in the long term, let's say 10 years from now, what do you see as the nature of the customer relationship between enterprises and Google? That is, how will companies depend on Google for their needs besides advertising?
Yeah. Well, advertising is such a good business that we wanted to have other businesses as well, and we invest in them, but the advertising has done so well for us. That's why we've stayed at 98%. At one point, it got to 97%. So we are trying to diversify away from that. But and again, if you're in the advertising business, you should love it, and we love it very much. If you extrapolate forward and you start thinking about what is the economic structure of the internet 10 years from now, it's reasonable to expect that a lot of corporations will pay the money that they pay today to IT companies to internet companies. A lot of the traditional IT services are becoming internetized, sorry for the word. And you have these all sorts of hosted services, if you will. So Google could eventually expect to have a good chunk of revenue from enterprises paying us for us doing things within their company using our computers. We have a set of initiatives there. They're doing very well. They're starting from the bottoms up, and they are much, much cheaper than the competition. So it's classic disruptive strategy. I think eventually we'll get there. The other one has to do with the other source of potential revenue, which will be subscriptions. And subscription here means buying things digitally once or many times. Your monthly subscription, somehow you put your credit card in. And the technology to do what are called micropayments has now existed for a while. Some of it was invented here in Pittsburgh, by the way. And it looks to me like we're going to have advertising, which I think will still be a very large component, some enterprise business, and then probably some of this either micropayments or subscription services as we learn how to sell things. Some examples of companies that do this, stuff that we don't do today. Amazon, for example, has a very nice digital download service where you can buy things digitally. That's an example of a revenue source that's not advertising, that is internet sensitive. And I think you'll see more of that from all of the leading firms.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I think this.
It's okay. Well, let's do 2.
Okay, we'll do 2. We'll do 2. Go on.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. You talked about culture at Google, that it's very open culture. My question is how open Google's culture is for those who want to have access and who have a product which can be useful to other people and Google might be interested in. How can people gain access to Google people to showcase their product?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have people who are looking for things in the areas that we care about. And so again, if you know somebody at Google or you publicize what you're doing, we typically will find you, or you can talk to us today. Mm-hmm. And then there was a final question?
Yeah, there's one more question in the back.
I've been in IT for 25 years, and my question for you today is, as a CEO of my own IT staffing firm, my son asked me a question the other day I did not know how to answer. And he said, Dad, he said, what? He's 15 years old. I figure he'll be in high school for 3 more years, 4 years of college. What advice should I give to my 15-year-old son because he wants to get in IT? What path should he be on in order to be successful? I know it's 7 years out, but even though I'm in the industry, I was not sure how to answer his question. Could you help me out with that?
Is he a programmer today?
He's only 15.
Well, he should be.
He wanted to get into developing software for games.
At 15, he should be programming, and programming games is a very good thing. One of the things that people don't appreciate is how powerful computer gaming is now. Parents are always obsessed with, oh, I've lost my son into the gaming world. But when they emerge with this amazing ability both to move their fingers a lot, but also to do strategic navigation. And strategic game theory is very, very impressive. But to give you a technical IT answer, the most interesting stuff that's going on is in the gaming world, and in the web programming world. And so the simple answer would be to say, build a game and build it on the web. And build a multiplayer game on the web between you and your 15-year-old buddy who's down the street. I'm so mad at you, I've taken the car keys anyway, or I guess it doesn't drive yet. In the future, when I take the car keys, you can still play with your friend down the street over the internet. And building that sort of the networking skills and the interactive skills is a very, very good skill base for the world that your son will be graduating into in his 20s and 30s. Almost everything is going to look like a multiplayer game in that sense. And that's why it's such an interesting area that they're all in. I wish, if I were 15, that's exactly what I would be doing.
It's not too late.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you.